The scalding broth hit my chest with the force of a final judgment. It wasn't the heat that shocked me, but the memory it ignited. A text from my own son just 3 nights before. I would burn this family to the ground before I ever lose her. He had kept his promise. And now, as my daughter-in-law smiled with the placid cruelty of a saint, my son grabbed my neck, his fingers pressing into the soft tissue where a pulse beat with the rhythm of my own life, a life I suddenly realized was no longer considered sacred in my own home. His palm cracked against my cheek, and in that blinding flash of pain, he disowned me. Then, as if summoned by the violence itself, the front door flew open. What kind of justice do you serve when your own son becomes your enemy? It happened on a Thursday, a late dinner at my table, in the heart of my Oakhaven Valley estate. I had spent the afternoon preparing a meal meant to mend bridges. I'd baked a rosemary focaccia, roasted a chicken with herbs from my garden, and set out a bottle of the Pinot Noir Corbin, always favored. It was supposed to be a return to normalcy, a quiet evening after weeks of simmering tension. I had foolishly allowed myself to hope that the storm had passed, that Serafina's volatile temper had settled, and that for one night I could lower my guard. She arrived as if for a premiere, teetering on stilettos that punctured the silence of the gravel driveway, a silk dress clinging to her frame like a second skin. Corbin followed her, his smile a tight, apologetic grimace. He handed me a bottle of cheap champagne, a peace offering I hadn't asked for, and kissed my cheek with the cold lips of a stranger. The air at the table was thick with unspoken grievances from the moment we sat. Serafina toyed with her food, her fork tapping a restless rhythm against the porcelain plate. Corbin's attention was a ghost, flitting between his plate and the glowing screen of his phone. I tried to weave a conversation from the thin threads of our shared life, asking about the new irrigation system for the lower vineyard, mentioning a biography I'd just finished. My words fell into the silence and vanished. Finally, Serafina pushed her plate away, the sound scraping against the quiet. She leaned back, a languid, deliberate motion. "Eleonora, do you ever tire of orchestrating everything?" she asked, her tone as casual as if she were commenting on the weather. My hand, halfway to my water glass, froze. "I'm not sure I understand what you mean, Serafina." A laugh, thin and sharp as shattered glass, escaped her lips. "This house, the vineyard, the wedding plans 6 years ago, even what Corbin eats for breakfast. It's exhausting just witnessing you play queen in your little kingdom." My gaze slid to Corbin. He refused to meet it, his eyes fixed on the screen in his hand. He was a spectator at his own execution. I kept my voice a low, steady hum. "This is my home. I built it. I offer what I can out of love." Serafina's lips curved into a smirk. She lifted her wine glass, the deep red liquid swirling ominously. "You want to talk about love?" she purred. And in one fluid, vicious movement, she hurled the entire glass of wine into my face. The cold liquid shocked my skin, stinging my eyes and soaking the front of my blouse. I gasped, fumbling for a napkin, but I was too slow. Corbin's chair screeched back from the table. Before I could even wipe the wine from my chin, his hand, the same hand I once taught to hold a fork, swung through the air. The slap was a deafening crack in the silence of the room. "Stop it," he hissed, his face a mask of fury. "You're ruining everything." I didn't scream. I didn't weep. A strange glacial calm washed over me. I stood, wine dripping from my jawline onto the polished floor, and walked out of the dining room. Behind me, I could hear Serafina's triumphant, throaty laugh. Corbin said nothing. He didn't follow. In the cold light of the bathroom mirror, the red imprint of his hand was already blooming on my cheek. I looked like a stranger to myself, a woman who had somehow become a victim in the sanctuary she had built with her own 2 hands. I cleaned myself with the detached precision of the surgeon I once was, my movements economical and steady. There was nothing left to say that hadn't already been said with violence. That night, the text message arrived, the 10 words that served as the epitaph for the son I thought I knew. I'd rather lose my mother than lose my wife. It wasn't a choice. It was a declaration. I sat on the edge of my bed, the phone heavy in my hand, and let the truth of it settle into my bones. Then, with a clarity that felt both terrifying and liberating, I rose and walked to my study. From the bottom drawer of my desk, I retrieved the thick leather binder that contained the architecture of my life's work, the Oakhaven Valley estate. Page by page, I turned through the deeds, the trusts, the meticulously planned transfers of assets. Corbin's name was everywhere, a recurring motif in the symphony of my legacy, designated as the pending beneficiary. But nothing was final. Nothing was yet beyond my reach. I closed the binder, the weight of it a solid, grounding presence in my lap. I don't know what other mothers would do in that moment. Perhaps they would have sought reconciliation, offered another chance, or simply absorbed the pain in silence. But I had been struck for the last time. Something inside me, a mechanism of self-preservation I hadn't realized I possessed, clicked into place. I would not be a mother who begged for the scraps of her child's affection. I would be the woman who built the empire. And if you've ever been made to feel like a trespasser in your own life, ask yourself this: how long will you share a table with those who have already decided you are disposable? That night was the last time I allowed anyone else to write my story, and it was the first night I remembered how to hold the pen myself. The following morning I was awake at dawn. The ache in my cheek was a dull throb, a physical reminder of the previous night's betrayal. I bypassed the kitchen, the aroma of coffee holding no comfort, and went directly to the secure storage room in the west wing. Unlocking a steel file cabinet, I pulled out the black binder labeled Estate Master Plan. I carried it to the dining room table, now cleared of the disastrous meal, and sat in the chair where my son had sat when he'd struck me. I began my review, page by meticulous page, the deeds to the 1,200 acres of vineyard, still solely in my name. The trusts for the winery operations, the investment portfolios, the liquid assets. Corbin's name appeared next to the words pending beneficiary again and again. A few preliminary documents had been signed, but the final binding transfer packets remained in a sealed yellow folder, awaiting a signature I now had no intention of providing. A profound stillness settled over me. It was not the quiet of hesitation, but of absolute certainty. I stood, walked to the landline on my study wall, and dialed a number I hadn't used in nearly a decade. Silas Croft answered on the second ring. He had been a junior associate at my late husband's law firm, a man I remembered for his unnerving intelligence and a demeanor so cool it bordered on Arctic. He now ran his own elite practice in the city. "Silas," I said, my voice even. "It's Eleanor Vance. I need to execute a complete revision of my estate, not next week, today." He didn't waste time on pleasantries or questions. "My office." 10:15, he replied, and the line went dead. I arrived at 10. His office was on the top floor of a minimalist glass tower, a space devoid of personal effects or warmth. There was no receptionist, only a single ticking clock on a vast white wall. He opened the door himself, his square-rimmed glasses and severe suit unchanged by the years. He was a man who could dismantle a person's life with a few quiet sentences. I handed him the binder, pointing to the sections I had flagged. "Anything bearing the name Corbin Vance is to be removed or frozen, effective immediately," I stated. He nodded, not a flicker of surprise in his eyes, and began to read. For 45 minutes, the only sounds in the room were the rustle of paper and the soft scratch of his pen in a black notebook. Finally, He closed the binder and leaned back, regarding me with a look of detached assessment. "It's all yours, Eleonora," he said. "Every transfer is pending. Nothing has been filed with the state." A nothing is binding. We can retract everything. I asked him to outline the steps. "Step 1, he began. "We issue a formal written revocation of all transfer intentions. Step 2, we establish an ironclad protective clause against any future claims of entitlement. Step 3, we secure and file new beneficiary designations without delay." "Do all 3, I instructed. He promised the drafts before lunch. I left his office feeling a strange sense of lightness, as if a physical weight had been surgically removed from my chest. Back at home, I returned to the dining table. I took out every page that mentioned Corbin and laid them out, a cartography of my broken trust. I gathered them, sealed them in a fresh manila envelope, and wrote in bold black ink, "Void, do not process." By 3 o'clock, Silas's email arrived. The subject line read, "Vance Restatement, Final." There was no version 1, no draft 2, only finality. I printed the pages, arranged them in a new, clean binder, and called a mobile notary service. At 6:05, a polite woman in a gray blazer stood in my living room. I signed every line without a moment's pause. She affixed her seal, packed her briefcase, and was gone in less than 20 minutes. When the door clicked shut behind her, the house felt different. It was as if the very walls had exhaled a breath they had been holding for years. In the profound silence, I took the sealed envelope of voided documents to the fireplace. I lit the corner of the top page with a match and watched as my son's name curled into ash and disappeared. It wasn't an act of revenge. It was an act of removal. There are moments when a woman reads her own name on a legal document and understands, with piercing clarity, that she still owns herself. In that moment, I ceased to be a mother, waiting for an apology, and became a woman, reclaiming her peace. By Saturday morning, the transformation was complete. The new estate plan, notarized and filed, was locked in my study. Corbin Vance was no longer a name on any asset. He hadn't just been disinherited. He had been erased from the architecture of the future I had built. The quiet of the house was no longer a void, but a territory I had won back. I rose before the sun, drove my truck to the local filling station, and picked up a copy of the Valley Ledger. There, on the bottom of the front page, was the small announcement I had arranged for 2 days prior. Eleonora Vance, proprietor of Oak Haven Valley Vineyards and retired cardiac surgeon, has formally announced the establishment of the Oak Haven Foundation, a charitable trust dedicated to providing housing and vocational training for displaced agricultural workers and women escaping domestic crisis. The foundation will be funded by an initial endowment of her entire $12 million estate. I read the paragraph twice, folded the paper, and placed it on the passenger seat. On the way home, I drove past the small community chapel where I had volunteered for years. I didn't go in. I simply sat in the truck, engine off, and looked at the familiar steeple. There was no regret in my heart, no lingering doubt. What I had done felt less like retribution and more like a necessary correction, a realignment of my life's purpose. Back at the house, I spent the afternoon in the gardens, trimming back the lavender and feeding the dogs. Then I waited. Just after 5, my phone began to ring. It was Corbin. I let it go to voicemail. He called again 20 minutes later. I silenced the ringer. At 6:18, a text appeared. "We saw the paper. Can we come over to talk?" I did not reply. A few minutes later, the gate camera sent an alert to my phone. The headlights of Corbin's car were sweeping across my driveway. I stood at the kitchen sink, slowly drying my hands, my heart a steady, even drum. By the time I opened the front door, they were already on the porch. Serafina, wrapped in a pale cashmere coat, offered a smile so sweet it was poisonous. Corbin lingered a step behind her, his head bowed. "Eleonora," Serafina began, her voice dripping with artificial warmth, "we just wanted to say how truly inspiring your announcement was. So generous." I stepped back, allowing them into the foyer, but not inviting them further. We stood in the formal dining room, at the very table where he had struck me. I had not moved a single chair. I wanted the memory to hang in the air between us, sharp and unavoidable. Serafina launched into a monologue, praising my community spirit, my generosity, her words a syrupy glaze over her true intent. Then came the pivot. She leaned forward, her smile softening into a mask of concern. "We were just wondering," she said, "if you'd formally filed the donation yet. There might be a small window to adjust some of the structural details. Perhaps the foundation could be managed by the family to ensure the legacy is protected. Corbin could oversee the operations." I listened to her entire performance without blinking. When she finally fell silent, I turned, walked into the kitchen, poured myself a glass of cold water, and returned. I met her gaze directly. "No," I said. "It's done." The smile on her face didn't fall, it fractured. A tiny, almost imperceptible crack appeared in her composure. She blinked, her posture stiffening. She had come expecting a negotiation and had walked into a fortress wall. Corbin finally found his voice. It was weak, pleading. "I feel left out," he stammered. "I wanted a chance to make it right. This is our family legacy." "This is my legacy," I corrected him quietly. Serafina's voice rose, losing its polished edge. "Do you have any idea what you've done? You've embarrassed us. People will talk. This is irrational, vindictive." She stood so abruptly her chair screeched on the floor. Then it happened. She snatched the decorative soup tureen from the center of the table, the very one I had planned to use for our reconciliation dinner, and flung it at me. The cold broth I'd prepared earlier splashed across my chest, soaking my sweater. I stumbled back as she began to scream, a torrent of accusations about betrayal and respect. Corbin rushed forward and grabbed my arm, his grip bruising. "Apologize to her," he demanded. "Just apologize." The absurdity of the command was breathtaking. I shook his hand off, and I saw his other hand rise, ready to strike me again. That was the moment the front door flew open. My neighbor, Cassia, stood on the threshold, her phone held high, its camera light a single unwavering eye. She had been on her porch, had seen them arrive, and a sense of unease had prompted her to watch. The moment she heard shouting, she had started recording. Serafina froze, her face a canvas of pure shock. Corbin dropped his hand and stepped away from me as if I were fire. "Cassia," I said, my voice clear and calm, "please call the sheriff." She did, right there, putting the dispatcher on speakerphone. By the time 2 deputies arrived, Serafina had composed herself enough to claim it was all a terrible accident, a misunderstanding. Corbin tried to mediate, his words tripping over each other. But there was no misunderstanding the video on Cassia's phone, nor the fresh bruises forming on my arm where Corbin had grabbed me. Statements were taken. Reports were filed. They were placed in separate patrol cars and driven away. I locked the door behind them, cleaned the soup from the floor, and changed my shirt. Then I went to my study, opened the binder labeled Final, and added a new, handwritten addendum to the trust agreement. No visitation under duress, no reinstatement under emotional pressure, no second chances. Something irreversible had happened. Not the thrown soup or the shouting, but the final, undeniable confirmation that to them I was not a mother. I was a gatekeeper to a fortune, and that gate had just been bolted, chained, and welded shut forever. The deputies stayed for over an hour, their presence a calm, official barrier against the chaos that had just unfolded. One walked the property with Cassia, documenting her vantage point. The other took my statement, which I delivered with clinical precision, omitting no detail. I did not change out of the soup-stained sweater. I wanted the evidence photographed. From the window, I watched as Corbin and Serafina were led away. He kept shaking his head in disbelief. She argued with the officer until she was told to be silent. Cassia handed her phone over to the deputies without a word. We stood side by side and watched the playback, the footage now logged as official evidence. You could hear Serafina's voice escalate into a shrill shriek, see the violent arc of her arm, and witness Corbin's aggressive grab. The video was clear, damning, and irrefutable. After they left, I was given a card with a case number. One of the officers mentioned victim support services. I told him it wouldn't be necessary. He gave me a long, searching look, then simply nodded. The silence that reclaimed the house was no longer peaceful. It was sterile, like a room that had been scrubbed clean after a contamination. I went to my study and opened a file I had prepared with Silas weeks ago, labeled Emergency Protocols. It contained pre-drafted forms for the immediate suspension of financial access and the revocation of power of attorney, contingencies for a moment just like this. It had escalated. I picked up the phone and called Silas's 24-hour line, leaving a single, curt message on his voicemail. The restriction protocols are active. Execute immediately. By morning, an email from Silas confirmed it was done. All linked financial accounts were suspended. The power of attorney was void. The estate accounts were now flagged with a strict no-contact order for Corbin, Serafina, or any of their known affiliates. The legal language was cold, but it felt like a warm blanket around me. At 9:30, I drove to the county courthouse. I wore a navy blue blazer I hadn't touched in years, the one I'd worn to my husband's final military honors ceremony. It felt like armor. I filed a request for a restraining order against them both, not just for physical proximity but for financial and legal contact as well. I provided the police report, Cassia's witness statement, and the video evidence. By noon, a judge had granted a temporary protective order. They were barred from coming within 500 feet of my property, from contacting me by any means, and from filing any claims against my estate. Violation would result in immediate criminal penalties. I walked out of that courthouse and felt the first clean breath in months. I pinned a copy of the court order inside the pantry door, a place I would see every morning, not a reminder of fear, but of finality. That evening, the new security system flagged a vehicle at my gate, Corbin's. An automatic alert was sent to the sheriff's department. Before I could even cross the room, a patrol car was pulling in behind him. He was escorted away without a word. The deputy gave me a solemn nod as he passed. I did not wave. I simply went back to my kitchen and continued chopping vegetables for a stew. Later that night, I added a new clause to the estate binder. Section 7B, irrevocable disinheritance based on conduct. It detailed the events, the police case number, and a single, final sentence. Any future attempt to appeal this removal will be met with the full legal opposition of the Oak Haven Foundation. The gate was no longer just locked, it was fortified with proof. A few days later, a reporter called about the police report. I declined to comment. The article that ran was titled, "Philanthropist Survives Alleged Assault by Disinherited Family." The whispers in the valley grew louder, but I slept better that week than I had in a decade. The wind still moved through the oak trees, but inside my home, the air was still. I was no longer waiting for the other shoe to drop. Then, Jude sent an email with the subject line, "You'll want to see this." Attached was a file containing court records from another state, 4 years old. The plaintiff was a 78-year-old woman named Agnes Thorne. The defendant was Serafina. Agnes had accused Serafina of convincing her to liquidate her savings, nearly $100,000, for a wellness venture that never materialized. The money vanished. Agnes passed away before the case could be resolved, and it was dismissed. Serafina had left a trail, faint but undeniable. I remembered a name Corbin had once mentioned in passing, a man named Julian Croft, Serafina's ex-fiancé, whom she'd painted as unstable and obsessed. After a few calls, I found him. Julian's voice was weary but steady. He told me he'd been waiting for a call like this for years. He described a whirlwind romance, a charming woman with grand business plans, and his own blind faith. He'd co-signed loans, opened joint accounts, and put a deposit on a retail space. The money disappeared. 3 months before their wedding, he discovered she was courting another man, a wealthy, recently widowed acquaintance of her family. When he confronted her, she vanished from his life, leaving him in financial ruin. He willingly provided a signed, notarized statement detailing everything. I compiled it all into a single comprehensive folder: the court records from Agnes Thorne's case, Julian's statement, the police report, the restraining order, and the estate revocation documents. It was a complete, chilling portrait of a predator. An unsigned letter arrived a few days later, slid under my door. It was from Corbin. He claimed he knew nothing of Serafina's past, that he had been blinded by love. He begged to see me alone. I filed his letter away. I wasn't ready. The final piece of the puzzle had not yet fallen into place. That piece arrived via a call from Silas. A senior reporter at the Valley Ledger had seen the public records and wanted to write a full story. I agreed to meet her, not to give my side, but to ensure she had the facts. In a quiet diner, she asked me one final question. "Do you think your son knew what she was?" I paused, stirring my tea. "I think he chose not to see," I replied. He looked away from what was uncomfortable until it was simply easier to defend the lie than to admit he was wrong. The article was published 2 days later under the headline, "Foundation Benefactor Escapes Pattern of Predatory Abuse." It laid out the facts plainly, quoting from Julian's statement and detailing the civil case. It spread like wildfire. My mailbox filled with letters from women who shared similar stories of betrayal and resilience. Then the legal proceedings began to move. The district attorney was prosecuting Serafina for assault and elder abuse. Silas had filed a civil suit against Corbin for coercion and interference. Their world began to crumble. Serafina was fired. Corbin was placed on unpaid leave from his real estate firm. An anonymous letter from Serafina arrived, filled with rage and accusations, which I filed away without response. The first true sign of their collapse was a photo from a neighbor, Corbin's car, loaded with boxes, outside a cheap rental duplex across town. Financial alerts I'd set up pinged my phone. Their joint accounts were being closed for insufficient funds. The furniture I'd gifted them appeared in blurry online listings. Serafina's employer issued a public statement distancing themselves from her. Then, another letter from Corbin arrived, this one more desperate. Serafina had left him, packed 2 bags, and vanished, leaving him with the dog and a mountain of debt. He wrote that the silence in his new apartment was deafening. He didn't ask for money. He asked if he could just sit on my porch one last time. I did not respond. I thought of the many versions of my son I had known, the boy with scraped knees, the young man grieving his father, the adult who slapped my face. We are all compilations of our choices, but in the end, only one version of us defines our legacy. A deputy called a week later. Corbin had requested a supervised visit at the county station. 10 minutes, neutral ground. I went, wearing my everyday clothes, feeling no anger, only a profound weariness. He looked smaller, diminished. He said he didn't know where to begin, that he couldn't recognize the man he had become in the video. He asked if I believed he had known what Serafina was. "I don't know what you knew," I told him, my voice even. "I only know what you chose to ignore. Silence is a choice, Corbin. Looking away is an action." His voice broke as he apologized. He asked if I could ever forgive him. I looked him directly in the eye. "I already have," I said. But forgiveness does not reopen a door that is closed. The 10 minutes were up. He stood, thanked me for coming, and walked away. I watched the door shut behind him. On the drive home, I felt the final snap of a bond that had been stretched to its breaking point for years. The war was over. Back at the house, I brewed tea and sat by the window. The farm felt still, but not empty. It felt like mine again. The weeks that followed were quiet. The foundation I'd established sent a letter of thanks, detailing the programs now running on the first wave of funding. A support group for elderly women, a legal clinic, transportation grants. I pinned the letter to the corkboard above my desk. It was proof that something beautiful could grow from the ashes of betrayal. One crisp autumn morning, I walked to the edge of the property where a simple wooden bench my husband had built years ago still stood. I sat, feeling the cool air on my face, and thought about the letter I'd received from a young girl named Ruby, who was part of a youth program funded by the foundation. She wrote, "Sometimes when people don't want you, it makes you think you are the problem. But now I am learning how to like my quiet voice, that it doesn't need to be loud to matter. Thank you for giving people like me a quiet place to grow." I held her letter, the paper worn from rereading. The last year had been a violent pruning, a cutting away of dead and diseased branches. It was a painful, necessary act. I looked out at the dormant vineyard, the vines cut back to their essential form, resting before the promise of a new season. I knelt and placed my hand on the cold, rich soil. I did not plant anything new, not yet. The ground needed to rest, but it was clean again. It was open. That night, I wrote a single line in my old journal. "Not every cycle ends in bloom. Some end in breath." Then I closed the book. Sleep came easily, not because everything was solved, but because I had finally stopped trying to fix what was meant to remain broken. I no longer owed anyone a version of myself I had already left behind. The next morning, I let the sunlight reach my face before opening my eyes. And then, I simply began again.